All right, so we're gonna get started. Okay, hopefully you saw that slide progress to a PLU slide. If you didn't, someone put that in the Q&A. I always start with this one just as a way to make sure that everyone is seeing the slides progress, but also to introduce myself. So, oh, there wasn't an option for high school senior. So sorry. I don't know what happened there. So those of you that put other, I imagine you were high school seniors. Now I understand. Thank you for letting me know. So this is what I love about the Q&A. My name is Melody Ferguson. I'm the Associate Dean of Admission at Pacific Lutheran University. So that is where I work. But again, tonight I'm not here to talk about PLU. I'm just here to talk about college in general. So to give you a little bit background on why I wanted to do this session and why I was happy to help, there's kind of two main reasons. One is I was a first generation college student from Federal Way, Washington, and ended up at UW Seattle, which was a great fit for me. But I had no idea how to navigate this process. It was a little confusing. I was a little overwhelmed. And I think even nowadays, especially because the internet exists in a lot of new ways since when I went to college, it's even more overwhelming. So I love getting to help students just navigate this process, whether it's through PLU or not. But I've been working in higher education for about 20 years, and I've worked in higher education at 3 different universities and colleges. So I have a broad background and perspective to share. I also am excited to be here because I am currently broadcasting live from Bonney Lake, Washington. So this is also the community in which I live. I have 2 sons who attend Mountain View Middle School, and I kind of know what's happening in this community. I have a husband who teaches at Lake Ridge, and one of my kids will be at Bonney Lake High School next year. So I want to be able to provide resources and expertise and give back to a community, especially a school community that my kids are getting so much from. So for me, this is both personal and professional to be here. So I really appreciate you being here. I know some of you are probably eating dinner or wrapping up your day, but hopefully because it's a Zoom webinar, you're able to just listen and take in some information, get some questions answered. And if you need to check back in with me, I'll make sure you have my information as well as it's always right above me. So you can always email, call, or text. So when I was thinking about this presentation, I was looking at some research that we had received recently from a national organization. And they interviewed or did a survey of both upperclassmen and underclassmen currently in high school. And they asked them what most prevents you from researching information about colleges. This was, in August, so right before the fall. So kind of similar to just what is causing you some maybe stress or anxiety or questions or concerns through this process. And I thought it was interesting kind of the differences between upperclassmen and underclassmen, but also what seemed to be just at the top of people's lists. And I think this is a little bit different than it has been in the past. And so I think that was one of the reasons some of your College and Career Center staff approached me, because they were getting lots of questions from students and families and wanted to be able to provide resources for them related to four-year college admission. So I am going to launch another poll because I'm curious if you feel the same way. So this one, hopefully I didn't forget something. All right, so there you go. These are the same as on the screen, but I did add something else on there. Let me know. What seems to be giving you the most stress or causing you the most questions, or what's preventing you from getting started if you haven't started in this process? Great, and a few more people have joined us. Welcome in. And I'm going to show you the results of this one in a second. So if you haven't voted, you have like 1 more second. But the majority of you did, which is great. So we're going to end the polling, and I'm going to share the results with you. Sometimes it takes a second to get on the screen or come off the screen. But what you'll see is don't know where or how to start was the #1 answer for the people in this room. And then number 2 and number 3 are kind of, it looks like pretty tied, a little bit more on facing the stress, worry, and pressure, but scared of going into debt is also in here. Too busy, not sure you'll get in. Too many choices was that one for you guys, which is great. So I'm hoping this will help. So this is, we will definitely get you started. All right, so So hopefully that goes away from your screen shortly. If it doesn't, let me know. All right, so when you're thinking about getting started, we're actually going to start there. How do you even start? And we're going to talk a little bit about this just for a couple slides, and then we're going to switch to kind of how to start getting that application going. That's a few slides, and then we'll just have some final tips and tricks. I've kind of sprinkled websites throughout this presentation that are not PLU websites, so just websites that are out there that you can use as a family to help search for college or as a student to search for college. And we're not going to talk a lot about scholarships or financial aid. So for those of you that are worried about going into debt, I completely understand. I work at a private school, but I know your counselors are working on kind of a financial aid session and other sessions here shortly that will cover more of that topic. So for this topic, we're really going to focus on how to get started and how to make this process work for you. And so what I want to start with is you have to sit down and you have to do a little bit of brainstorming. You have to think about what really matters to you. And this is sometimes even hard to start this list because what should matter to you? I get a lot of students that ask, like, should this matter? But only you're going to end up knowing how to answer some of these questions. But this is how I would encourage you to start getting started. So what's your learning style? How do you learn best? How are you academically successful? Do you need to engage with your teachers and faculty members? Do you need extra support? Do you work better in groups, or do you work better when you're just listening? We're all learning a lot about our learning style right now as we go through this virtual engagement environment, because I think it's forcing us to realize what we, liked about being in person in school, what we like about being virtual, and kind of answering some of those questions. So what's your learning style? Because different colleges and universities are going to support that, or maybe not be able to support that. So it's good for you to know how you're going to be academically successful. What are your goals and aspirations, especially around academics? Do you know what you want to study? Do you not know? Are you undecided? So do you need a school that's going to help you figure that out? Or if you know you want to study a certain degree or certain major or be a certain job when you grow up, does that school support that goal and aspiration? You can't assume. Big schools don't have every major. Small schools may have that program. So it's something for you to look at as you think about this. But if you're undecided, this is just as important, because a school should be able to help you figure that out. So you can ask those questions. Have you looked at your likelihood to be accepted? Not many of you were that worried about, am I going to get in? There were a couple of you, but there's actually ways to find out online, and I'm going to show those to you in a second, where you can see, based on my GPA and my background, what is my likelihood of being accepted? You can actually Google Pacific Lutheran University acceptance rate, University of Washington, Seattle acceptance rate. You can just put it in the Google bar, and you don't even have to click on a link. Google will just tell you. So that'll tell you the percentage, but it won't tell you about you. There's some websites that actually do that. Does geography matter to you? Do you want to be close to home, far away from home, in a college town, in a big city? Does the location matter? For some people it does. For others it doesn't. It's not about that at all. So again, it's not about what matters to everyone. It's about what matters to you. So think about the environments you like to explore, places you like to visit, where you feel most comfortable. Big, small, public, private, you may or may not know what those things are. So we're going to talk about how you explore different types of colleges soon. And what's nice is you can explore a big school, explore a small school. I'll tell you in what ways. And then see which one maybe appeals to you, appeals to what your interests are, and again, where you feel comfortable. When you're choosing a school, you're not just choosing where you're going to go and learn. A lot of times you're going to live there as well. And so you need a school that's also going to support not only those academic goals and aspirations, but allow you to pursue your hobbies and passions as well. So if you're doing something right now and it's taking up your time, you're involved in a sport or choir or theater, or you're in leadership, or you work, what is it that takes up your time? You also want a school, if you want to continue doing those, that is going to allow you to do that, where maybe you can study science and still play the violin, or whatever you do for your hobby. Are you on a 504 plan or an IEP plan? Are you someone who needs a little bit more extra support? Does the school have that? And can they make accommodations? Those things don't go with you to college. And so it's important that you ask the school, they usually call them accommodations, what type of accommodations they have, or can they support the needs that you have? Not every school can, but most do. And so you can really ask those questions. And then what am I willing to pay is something to at least start talking about. A lot of times families haven't had this conversation yet until it's senior year, but there's a difference between what can I afford. Not a lot of us just have college tuition kind of in the bank account waiting for us. Some do, and that's great, but that's just not what everyone has. So you have to think about not what can I afford, but what am I willing to pay? And so am I willing to take out loans? Am I willing to work in the summer to save up money? You know, start thinking about, are there kind of financial sacrifices or commitments you can start to make for college? And again, you don't have to know all the answers to that, but just start having those conversations. So these are some of the questions I would say take home, think about this weekend, write some things down, because then what you're going to do is you're going to take all those things that matter to you and you're going to do some research. You're going to now jump into some of these opportunities that are available to you, and you're going to have questions, because if it matters to you, you should ask a question about it. And so you can do that in a variety of ways. But what I find is if you start doing this research without thinking about what matters to you, you don't usually have questions, or you don't even know where to start or what to ask. What website do I want to look at? If you're someone who's taking AP or IB classes, you know, are you researching what those schools do for AP credit or IB credit? You know, those are things to start thinking about. So you have those questions, you know, a few things that matter to you. Now you can start doing some of these things. So there's college fairs, there's virtual college fairs. I'm going to share with you some dates on the last slide that are coming up. And these are environments of 500 colleges, 200 colleges, all just hanging out, waiting for you to connect with them. But they also have ways to either passively or actively engage. So passive engagement is going to look like watching a video, looking at some links, maybe favoriting a college to look at later. Active engagement in those college fairs is going to look like sitting through a session, meeting one-on-one with somebody, maybe just they usually have little chat functions, almost like text messaging with a school. So there's gonna be lots of ways for you to passively and actively connect. Every college has pivoted to virtual engagement. So there are so many ways now to visit a college from the comfort of your own home in your pajamas. So you can go on campus tours, whether they're live or just virtual. You can join a session. You can do a panel on the major that you're interested in, or a student panel. You can connect with a student. I'm going to show you a list of some of these, but if you know a school is in your top 5, find a way to virtually engage with them, and they're going to offer you so many choices. All the blue links on here are actual links where I've linked to different resources. Campus visits, you can schedule that time to come to campus. Some schools are now open. So for example, PLU started taking in-person visits last week. They're limited, they're one at a time, but so you have to plan a little bit more, plan ahead. But some schools are starting to open up that ability to actually walk around campus. And so depending on where you live, the nice thing about living in the Bonney Lake Sumner area is there's a lot of colleges within driving distance from here. So see if they're starting to take campus visits. Not everyone is, but quite a few are. Use your connections, whether that's community members, alums from a school you're interested in, your counselors, even people like me. So I work with students from Bonney Lake and Sumner that are interested in PLU, but there is a person like me at every college or university. Some might work with the whole state of Washington, some might work by county or school district, but there is a person that you can connect with. But your people in your life are just as important. They might be able to offer you some really great pieces of advice or information that you hadn't thought of. I know that every teacher is offering or has office hours in this virtual world. And I know that some of them are having a lot of people show up and some of them aren't, but that's a really great place to go. If you know that your teacher went to a school you're interested in, jump into their office hours. And if they're not working with somebody, maybe ask them a couple questions about that school. It's also a great way to ask for a letter of recommendation. So, you know, lots and lots of options. If you have a question, just for those of you that are just jumped in, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and you can pop it in there, and we will be going over those at the end. So what's great about this is if you think of one, put it there, and I'll get to all of them when we're done. Responding, okay, so the last one is engage and connect. And what I mean by that is there are some schools where they actually are looking at your interest in them as one of the things they're looking at for admission. This is for more competitive colleges. It's called expressed interest. And what it means is they want to see that you as a student are interested in them. So they're tracking if you open their emails, if you respond to them, if you click on something, if you come to a virtual session, if you send an email or call, they're kind of tracking those things. Not every school does this. You can actually ask an admission counselor if they do. But it's something where if it is a school you're interested in, respond to an email, just say thank you. You can also respond to an email and unsubscribe. So if you're not interested, that's another option. So you do have those opportunities to engage with colleges along the process. So I do encourage you, especially if you're looking at more competitive colleges, to make sure you're engaging back. We're sending you a lot, probably a lot of paper, a lot of email. I know it's a little overwhelming, but start sorting through that and kind of at least responding to the schools you're interested in. I put 3 websites on here that are all different places where you can actually compare schools. You can look at specific things about schools. They have different sections related to athletics, student life, faculty, all sorts of things on those. Niche.com is great in that that's one of the ones where you can actually put in your information and it tells you your likelihood to be accepted. And I've checked it out for a few schools and it looks pretty accurate. They're using data that we send to a national clearinghouse. So those are some great websites that you guys can utilize. And it's not too late to respond to those emails if you're a senior. I quickly looked at the question and answers. I'm not going to respond to all of them, but just a great point that I want to bring up now. No, never too late. We know a lot of students don't even start this process till their senior year. And so that's something we're kind of expecting, is that we'll hear from them a lot more in the fall of their senior year than we will before that. All right. So now you've kind of done some assessment of what your needs are. You've researched some colleges, you've used a variety of resources, and now you know where you're going to apply. And the first thing I want to talk about is we're only talking about where you're going to apply, not where you're going to go to college. Those are 2 different things to think about. I think a lot of students want to think about both together. I think that's really overwhelming. We're just talking about where you're going to apply. Applying is not committing you to anything. So let's think about that. There's one circumstance where it does, we'll talk about that. But otherwise, college is not committing, or applying is not committing you to anything. We're going to use the acronym TREAT. It's October, so I'm thinking about trick or treat right now. So we're going to talk through what I consider the 5 most common application requirements. But obviously there are exceptions to every rule, and sometimes schools require other pieces of paper, aspects of your life. Some schools don't require some of these 5, and we'll talk about that as we go. So the first T is for transcript. And so this is one that I know that your counselors and College and Career Center staff are getting questions about, because junior year, the spring, was different, right? It wasn't what we expected. It's not what you expected. And maybe it didn't turn out the way you want, or you have a pass on your transcript and you don't know what that's going to do. Or maybe you have a fail on your transcript and you don't know what that's going to do. So I know that this T is for transcript is probably giving you a little bit more anxiety than it has given students in the past. And we'll talk through that. So one of the things we look at is called grade trend. And so we look at how your grades have progressed over time. When we look at a transcript, we're not just looking at the GPA and then moving on to the next piece of the application. We really want to see what makes up that GPA. And so we're going to think about what courses you chose. That's that rigor of coursework. Did you push yourself a little bit academically? Some schools are going to really look at that. We're going to look at grade trend, like I said. So that's maybe 9th grade was a hard transition for you, but you got your feet under you in 10th grade a little bit more. And then maybe in the fall of 11th grade, you were doing even better. And we are going to know that spring of junior year is something interesting. And so it's not something you have to worry about. We don't know that that happened. It happened nationally. And so we really are going to take that into account. If you did well in that spring, great. Good for you. Nice work. If you had a rough time in that spring because it was a crazy time, there's going to be a part where you can tell us about that. And I'm going to talk about that when we get to the A is for application. So just wait on that. But know that we understand and we'll be taking that into account. We will also look at senior year course selection. We generally won't see your senior year grades when you apply to college. Most college application deadlines are in October, November, December. There are some in January, but usually all before that first semester ends. So it usually means senior year grades aren't posted by the time we get that first transcript. There are a lot of colleges, though, that will actually allow you to send in what's called a mid-year report, which is you can send in and let us know how that first semester went. So if you're someone that really wants this semester to show a little bit more of that progress, a little bit more of that positive grade trend, you can do that, but I would ask that admission office first if they will take those and consider them for admission and scholarship purposes. That would be a question I would ask. PLU does. I can't say that every school in the state does. Some schools are going to take your GPA and they're going to weight your GPA. And what that means is if you've taken IB, AP, pre-AP, pre-IB, honors courses, they bump your GPA up for each course that you took. So when they consider you for admission, they're going to actually look at a higher GPA than is on your transcript. But again, not every school does that. So when we're talking about what questions or what can you research, when I'm going over these application things, you can go back and you can write those things down and ask a school. If you have a dream college or 5 schools you're applying to, and you were someone that took a bunch of AP or IB classes, it's a great question to ask. Do you use a weighted or unweighted GPA? If they use an unweighted GPA, the nice thing is you're being compared against everyone and they are still going to look at rigor of coursework. If they use a weighted GPA, you're going to usually be on what's considered a 4.5 scale. So a perfect GPA with lots of challenging courses is actually a 4.5 instead of a 4.0. Super complicated. If any of you are applying to PLU, we do weight GPAs and you can send me your unofficial transcript and I can tell you what it is. Some schools are not going to require that you turn in an official transcript from your high school. Some are, so you're going to have to work with your high school, usually main office, to figure out how to send those. Your counseling center, there's usually a form or something that you fill out to get those sent in. There are schools that actually don't even want a transcript from your high school, and they're going to have you self-report your courses and your grades. University of Washington, Seattle is a school that does that. And so if you're applying there, one of the things I recommend is having an unofficial copy of your transcript available to you so that when you're filling that out, you can do so as accurately as possible. R is for recommendation. Not every school requires an academic letter of recommendation, but quite a few do. Some require more than one. So again, it's going to differ from school to school. But these are things you can ask if you can't figure that out very easily from their website. If a school doesn't ask for a specific type of recommendation, I do recommend that you use a core teacher. So math, science, English, social studies, those types of courses, because they know you best in a classroom setting, which is mostly what we're looking for. If they take more than one, that's where you can start choosing those like elective teachers or coaches or community members to write that second application or that second recommendation. But if you are most connected to your elective teacher, that is okay to turn that in, just giving tips. Think about who you ask. If you're someone who maybe struggled in some courses, but you actually have a really good relationship with that teacher and they can talk about your perseverance and your the way that you asked questions and kept trying, that actually might be a really good letter of recommendation. So you don't always have to have the teacher you did the best in their classes write that letter. And then definitely thank them. We read a lot of letters of recommendation and they are amazing. I wish as a parent or as you as students got to read all of them because they really are wonderful to read. So I definitely recommend that you give them some time. Like I said, maybe go into their office hours and ask them to write you a letter of recommendation and that you thank them afterwards because it does take time to write these. And they're a wonderful part of your application. They really do fill in some questions sometimes for admission offices. If a school does not require a letter of recommendation, I would not recommend that you send one because that usually means that they aren't going to even review it. You can definitely ask them that question. All right, E is for essay. So I do a whole 30-minute session on the college essay because it's a lot and I have that available. It's also not on PLU. I will send that to those of you in this session so that you have it. if you want to learn more about the college essay. But remember that the essay is the one place on the college application you almost have 100% control over, from that first letter to that last punctuation mark. In your senior year, you don't have control over a lot of like helping, your GPA or the activities that you're doing, but you definitely have a lot of control over this essay. So we do recommend you spend time on it if a school requires one. There are schools that don't require an essay. So Washington State University does not require an essay, for example. This is where we hear your voice. This is where we get to know you better. This is my favorite part of an application because of that. We're a small school. There's a lot of community. And so for me, reading these essays gets me really excited about the students that might join kind of this family. And so one of the things I recommend is for you to drop the word essay. So although this says E is for essay, I'd like you to think about it more like a personal narrative or a story. So those creative writing elements in English class are important. So setting and place and feeling and all of that, because we're trying to learn about you and your life. Don't list things we already know on the application. If you're going to choose to write about something that you wrote about already or listed already, we're going to ask that you maybe dive really deep into that. And remember that one small moment from your life can make a really great essay. So you're not trying to pack everything in to this essay, really just tell a story that highlights who you are. Grammar, punctuation, spelling do matter because they can distract from your story. So we do recommend that you let someone edit it or look at it. I also recommend that you read it out loud. You can be by yourself in your room, but if it doesn't sound natural to you, it might not be the story you're supposed to write. And you can also catch a lot of sentence structure issues when you actually read it out loud. There's a website at the bottom. It's a great website if you're just looking for help getting started. He has great brainstorming activities and things like that are free on his website. He also has some paid content, but the free stuff I think is actually really great. So I did put that there, but I'll also send you a copy of my presentation related just to an essay if this is the part that's troubling you. A is for application. So this is the actual application. You need to think about, how many of these do you want to turn in? They do cost money to apply, at least a lot of them do. There are applications that are free. PLU's application is free, Whitworth's application is free, but there are a lot of applications that can cost $40, $50, $60 or more. So it's important that you really think about where you want to apply and maybe get that narrowed down. They're saying the average college student applies to 5 to 7 colleges, but we have plenty that apply to less and plenty that apply to more. So you have to figure that out yourself. What style of application are you going to do? So some schools have their own application that you fill out. Some schools belong to an application where you do one application and you can send it to a bunch of schools. So one's called the Common Application. We're a part of that. It's one application. It is separate application fees for whichever schools you send it to if they have one. And some will require like a supplemental application. So maybe there's like an extra page that school really wants you to do. But most just stick to the Common App. There's also a newer one called the Coalition application. If you're applying to UW-Seattle, they are on that application. Again, one application and you can send it to a couple different schools. So lots of opportunity to fill out those applications. Schools have different deadlines, but do pay attention to them because there are schools that have what's called a one-date deadline. So they are due that day, and then at 12:01 a.m. the next day, it is late and they will not accept it. So you definitely want to make sure you pay attention if a school is on that deadline. So that is, again, UW-Seattle Falls. They're the one that always is a good example because they have some really unique things on that schedule. There's also schools that have early action or early decision. That is where maybe they have one kind of earlier date where they're giving priority spots to students who apply by that date. So there's some sort of incentive to apply early. And then they'll have a secondary date that's just their general application date. Most of those, it's really just priority. There are some where it can be what's called a binding decision. So if you get into that school, you're supposed to go there. But don't worry, you'll never be tricked into that. You will know because a part of the application is actually signing a statement that you agree to that. And I think your high school has to also sign it. So, and there's not as many schools that do that anymore. So it's mostly if you're applying to some competitive private schools, things like that. But generally, you don't have to worry about that. And then rolling admission is what a lot of us in Washington are on. So Central, WSU, PLU, quite a few schools I can't think of off the top of my head, where basically we start accepting people and just accept people as we go. We might have priority dates, but there's no like deadline. So we're kind of just rolling in our accepting of applications and our decisions. So those ones, you don't have to usually worry too much about a deadline. Sometimes there's like a final date where you have to apply by this final date, but very rarely. It's usually something where you can start applying now. You might even have friends who've been accepted to a college already. I know I think WSU started accepting, but I know a lot of us will start accepting soon, and then we'll just roll through the spring and fall. So for those of you that really want to wait until your fall semester grades are in, sometimes looking at rolling admission schools or looking at the dates of those general admission dates are going to be important. And then holistic review is something we say, colleges say, and no one understands. What does that actually mean? What does that have to do with me? It's important because it's something we want you to know. I think so many people get tied up on, there's one part of my application that's not very strong. So maybe it's your GPA, or maybe it's your essay is just not coming together. We're going to talk about the activity section in a second. But when we look at an application, you think about it almost like a pie. So each of these things I'm talking about is a piece of the pie. And what we want is a student that makes up a pretty decent kind of whole pie. So maybe one piece of your pie is a little bit bigger and one's a little bit smaller, right? So some places are stronger and some places are weaker. And so we are looking at all of those things when deciding if we are accepting a student to our campus. Also sometimes if we're awarding initial merit scholarships. So you don't have to worry that like one piece is too weak, especially if the rest of it is really strong. You might still have a great opportunity to be accepted to that college. So we review everything before making a decision. So there's not just like one thing, oh, if they have that, for sure not getting in. It's not that. I also think people think it's harder to get into college than it really is. And I'm going to show you some numbers at the end of this presentation that hopefully help you feel better about your chances of being admitted to a college. There's also a million types of colleges out there. So there is a college for every student. You just have to do that research to figure that out, and I can definitely help. But we're going to review everything. So that essay, that letter of recommendation, the application, we're going to talk about some other pieces here in a second before making any decisions. And then this year, there's a brand new section. This is the Common App version, but there is on that Coalition app or other university applications, there's now a section because of both COVID-19 and natural disasters, which we had one out here this year with a wildfire. So there's a section where you can address anything related to COVID-19 or any other kind of natural disaster that has impacted your ability to learn, be involved, has kind of dismantled something related to your education, if you want to. This is not a required section of any application. If you say no to answering this section, that's totally okay. But if there's something you want to say and you don't want it to be your whole essay, it doesn't have to be. You would just say yes to this question and you would write about that in here. So this is a new section. I know the Coalition app also has one of these. I know there are some applications that didn't add a section like this, but I've talked to a lot of those directors of admission, and all of them say to use what's called the additional information section, which every application has, where you can just write something that the application didn't ask, but you want us to know. So again, don't feel like you have to write your whole essay about it. And this is where you can really talk to us about the impact of COVID-19 on your education or your child's education. So it exists, we're gonna read it, and we want to know. So we're hoping not everyone feels like they have to write the essay about it, but they can use this section. Your counselors also have a section like this where they can report what the school did. So if they changed to virtual learning, what their grading system was like, all of that. I've already seen actually a Bonney Lake High School transcript. I admitted my first student yesterday from Bonney Lake High School, and they don't know yet, so I'm not going to say it here. But I did read that section, and I thought the counselor did a really great job of explaining both the situation in the spring and what is going on this fall. So you don't necessarily have to describe what your school did. This is really about its impact on you. The other part of an application that's really, really important is the activities section. And this is where you get to write about kind of all the things that take up your time outside of school. So whether that's activities through your community or your church, travel that you've done, work that you do. We know also this has been potentially, kind of disrupted. You can talk about that in that community disruption section. But we're looking at commitment, we're looking at leadership. Those are really, really important to us. So you'll be able to say that you did it in 9th, 10th, even 11th grade, because if you did it in the fall or we're planning to do it in the spring. 12th grade, you'll be able to tell us how many years you did it, what you did, and then there's even a little section to describe it. So you can talk about your roles or experiences within that activity. It's kind of like a resume or a brag sheet. We don't know how great you are unless you tell us. So put it here and don't sell yourself short. So if you taught yourself to play an instrument, put it down. There's a limited amount of spots, so some of you may run out, so you might have to choose. But for most of you, you can put some of those things in here. So we'd love to see them. But this is also one of my favorite sections because young people do so much more nowadays than I ever did as a young person. And then T is for test. Oh, one more thing on this page. It's not about the number either. So I think that kind of sounded that way. You might only put 2 or 3 things on here, but if you've been doing them for 4 years, if you've kind of gained leadership positions in them, that's going to be something we really value. So again, it's not about how many you have, it's more about depth in those activities. T is for test score. I think this is the one I'm getting asked the most about because your class, up until 6 months ago, was told to take their tests in the spring, make sure you sign up for one in the fall. We all were, even those of us that are test optional, we're encouraging you to do this as a part of your college search process. And now you're hearing the total opposite. So I understand that this is confusing. So first, just to get the yes, anyone will take the SAT or ACT, there are no preferences. But let's talk a little bit about the fact that over 1,600 colleges are now either test optional or test blind. If you want to know if a school you're looking at is, you can click right there, www.fairtest.org. They're tracking this across the nation. They have been for years, but now they're even more important than they were before. And what's interesting is most have gone test optional or test blind permanently, meaning it's not just for seniors, it's not just for juniors, that's just how they're going to do it. So although at first, I think there were people that were just like, okay, we're going to do it for this year and we'll see how it goes. But within the last about 2 months, most have just said, we're just going to move to it permanently. So currently every school in Washington is test optional, every 4-year college. And I haven't talked to every single one of them, but I've talked to all but like 3, and they're all permanently test optional or test blind. And we'll talk about the difference. Test optional means it's your choice, your option. So you get to say, yes, I want you to review my test scores, or no, I don't. And either way, you're going to be considered for admission at that school equally and scholarship equally. Test blind means you don't have a choice. They're not going to look at your test scores. So they're just not looking at anyone's test scores. So they've made a decision to consider everyone without a test. So even if you turn it in, they're not going to look at it as a part of your application process. So schools are in both camps, but I would say pretty much the process is the same. You're going to be reviewed based on all those other pieces of your application in a holistic manner. And this is just now not a part of that review. We've been test optional for 3 years, and I think it's been a really great move for us, just for a lot of reasons. And how you do on a random Saturday versus how you do over 4 years of high school, there's a really big difference. We know a lot of students go to their test and are sick, but they have to take it that day because that's the only one that month. Or maybe had homecoming the night before. That always happens. So they were up late. So, those are things that just always impacted people's scores, but they didn't get to talk about it or tell us, that was their score. So I think a lot of people still think they need to take the test. I get a lot of people like, okay, I'm signed up in November and it might get canceled. What should I do? Don't worry about it. Apply test optional. So I would just say if you haven't signed up for one and your school is test optional or test blind, the schools that you're applying to, don't. If you're signed up for November, but you're worried about it getting canceled, that's okay. This has become a really small piece of the pie, and I'm going to be worried when test scores isn't even something I talk about because I haven't quite figured out my acronym without a T. So treat works really well, but I'm ready to drop that T out of this equation. And then some schools will allow you to send scores earlier. So if you're someone who really wants to take them still and I can't talk you out of it, you can sign up for those later test dates. Hopefully they will happen, and ask the school if it can be something you send later for consideration for admission or scholarship, if that's something you really want to do. Just a reminder, I said this at the beginning, but I want to say it again, there are exceptions to every rule. So I'm speaking in broad terms, but every school gets to do it pretty similarly, but a little different. So this is where if there's something on here that you want to know if a school does or doesn't do, just ask them. Again, there's a person at every school who can help you. So some final tips. You can get in, I promise. Fewer than 100 schools in the United States are highly selective. They're called highly selective, which means they accept less than 25% of their applicants. So most of us are, accepting more than that. I actually looked up on niche.com the acceptance rates for 4 public schools and 4 private schools because I thought it would be interesting just to see. And so this shows you what percent of their applications are admitted. And you'll see that the majority of Washington State, I could have added more schools, are above 70%. We're accepting above 70% of our applicants. So we're maybe a little bit more accessible than you think we are. Use the additional information section if you need it. So maybe there's something that's not COVID related or not related to something we talked about, but you really want a school to know. You can add that into the additional information section. Take your time. Yes, pay attention to deadlines, turn things in. But also don't rush through it. We can tell when you filled out your college application on your phone and didn't do spell check. So it's just as important to kind of look at everything you do throughout the whole application. The ball's in your court a lot more than you think. You as families and students get to decide where to apply, and you will ultimately decide where to go. The reason you're getting so much mail and email is because we don't feel like we have a lot of control in this process. And so we really want to make sure that great students come to our schools. And so, that's part of this process. But I think sometimes taking some ownership and knowing that you have a lot more control in this process can be helpful. There is a person who reads applications, so it is still a personal process. So if there is a person assigned to your school, if they come for a visit or they email you, getting to know them is also a really great thing because they might advocate for you in the admission process. So again, that connection, that engagement can be really important. And we already talked about expressed interest, so I don't have to talk about that too much. We already talked about it. These are upcoming virtual college fairs. So the top one is a national college fair, virtualcollegefairs.org. It's on Monday, which I know is a no school day for students. I know there might be some asynchronous learning. I'm learning all these terms, but it is all day that day. So I think there's 508 colleges that are in there, or 600. It's a lot. Most Washington and Oregon colleges are at that fair, not all of them. But again, there's ways to passively and actively engage in that college fair. There's also a more regional college fair coming up, a few less schools, but more Washington and Oregon colleges. And that's not next week, but the week after. And so it's a really long website. But again, hopefully we'll give this to you. And I think your counselors have been sending it out or putting it on their pages as well. So these are great opportunities to engage and connect. And then this is PLU's list, and I'm just using it as an example because if you can't make those college fairs work for you, use those virtual engagement opportunities that colleges are setting up. So we're a small school, and these are all the things we're offering to students to engage with us. And you will find a list just like this. I went and looked around, SPU, Seattle U, Gonzaga, UW, WSU, everyone has a list like this, and it's kind of fun to see what's out there. So some are big events, so they might be multiple hours, but you can kind of jump in and out. Some are more just an hour, 30 minutes here or there. So hopefully something works around your schedule. And then that is my contact information. Obviously, I also have it on my backdrop. So I'm going to stop sharing here for a second. And I'm going to look at your questions because I've seen some pop in. All right, looks like some people are helping me answer them, which is great. All right, so it looks like Heather asked for the schools, oops, it always moves. For the schools eliminating XAT requirements for scholarships, if the route is letters of recommendation, who are the best people for which to request letters? So yes, most schools are not requiring test scores for scholarships or admission. So if they went test optional or test blind, it's usually for both. And if some are for letters of or asking for letters of recommendation for a scholarship, again, academic letters of recommendation from core subject teachers are always like your best bet if they don't give you any guidance on who should write those. So that would be something I would consider. And maybe if you've had a teacher for like more than 1 year or something like that, that might also be something to consider, someone who's seen you mature or progress throughout your academic career. Yeah, great question. How about running start students? So running start students still apply to college as freshmen, as first-year students, and that's a Washington state policy. So everything I said today completely matters. It's the same thing. We're just, when we talk about your transcript, we're talking about your running start grades and your running start coursework. We do see that as rigorous coursework, so it kind of counts into that academic rigor. But you don't apply to colleges as a transfer student. And I think that's always the biggest confusion. So what happens is we consider you along with your peers for admission. And then when you come to the college, you send a final transcript from that community college, and we transfer in all those credits. And then you become a freshman, sophomore, junior, depending on the credits that you bring in. So kind of everything I said today is the same thing. So totally the same, which is great. All right, so I'm going through them. Is it too late to respond to those emails as a senior? I already answered that earlier. It's not, it's never too late. No schools have had a deadline yet, so you can still engage with all of us. So please do that. I know that all my colleagues on other college campuses would love it if you engaged with them. Do recommendations need to be sealed most of the time, or can we ask teachers for recommendations to send to several schools? So nowadays, they're all kind of submitted electronically primarily. So like with the, let's use the Common application as an example. If you send that link, because what happens is you put their information in your Common app, it sends them information. They actually upload their letter and it gets attached to your application. And yes, for the Common App, for example, you can choose to use that letter for multiple schools. What you want to make sure though is that the recommender, the person you ask, does not mention another college or a college in their letter of recommendation. Ask them to keep it broad so that they don't mention that they're writing the letter of recommendation for a specific school and then another school gets it. But yeah, totally fine. We actually don't get very many letters of recommendation in like sealed envelopes anymore. They pretty much all come through some sort of electronic portal that school uses. So yes, they can send that to multiple schools as long as they're not writing it specifically for a college. Great question. We spoke about grade trend. How are running start grades looked at since those are college level courses? Yeah, so they count in that when we're looking at rigor of coursework. Running start grades are considered rigorous, so we are looking at them in that way. Most schools do not use them in a weighted GPA because they're already kind of naturally weighted because they at 1 quarter at running start weighs a lot more than 1 year of high school credit in terms of the number of credits you're receiving. But they are looked at oh, it's been a long presentation. We do look at them as rigorous courses. So running start is not always understood outside of Washington. So if you're looking out of state, you may want to do a small description of that in your additional information section. Does the University of Washington Tacoma have a completely different application process than Seattle? So I don't work for either school, but I do know they do. So you do apply to the schools separately. Do you know when the FAFSA is due? So the FAFSA opened October 1st. Oh, and this person went to PLU. Go Lutes. Always love that. The FAFSA opened October 1st. There is no deadline for the FAFSA. You can fill it out at any point, even when you're in school. So it stays open for that whole academic year. But there are schools that have priority dates, meaning that if you fill it out by a certain date, especially if there's someone where they have pools of money that might run out and they're first come, first serve, you want to pay attention to those. And those are going to vary by colleges or by college. So like we start sending out financial aid awards in December, and those are for students that usually have their FAFSA in by like mid-November. But our priority date is actually not until January or February. So we still consider you for full financial aid benefits through almost the whole year. So it's going to vary by college, but look for financial aid priority dates. That would be good to look at. With COVID restrictions and decreased student to teacher and classroom exposure, how have colleges adjusted tuition and how has tuition changed? It hasn't changed a ton. A few schools dropped tuition. There are some schools that have done that, but most schools have just offered more financial aid or scholarships. And a lot of people have offered, like, if schools require housing, they're not requiring housing anymore. So they've loosened up restrictions through that. But you're getting the same faculty. And I do think virtual learning looks different in college than it probably does in high school. A lot of schools are allowing students to sit in on classes, even virtually. So if that's something you want to do at a school you're interested in, that's something to consider. But most schools haven't made tuition decisions for next year yet. So we'll start seeing here soon if colleges do make some changes. So can't speak for anyone else though yet. Any suggestions on how to get out of taking the SAT now that it's mostly unneeded if you've already registered and paid? I'm not sure. The College Board is a for-profit institution, but I have to think that if you don't feel safe or if you don't like that opportunity, there's got to be potentially a way to cancel, but you'd have to work with the College Board on that. I wish I had a better answer for you. What if I haven't taken any higher level classes during high school? Does that mean I'm less likely to be accepted? No, not necessarily, especially if you still have a good GPA and have at least taken those core academic courses to graduate from high school. No, there's tons of schools that would still be really excited to have you. So no, it just might help for some of those like honors programs or more competitive colleges. Maybe that's something they'll consider. So it's going to depend on kind of what your GPA is. And definitely if you have questions or looking at PLU, you can always email me and I can give you guidance before applying. And most schools would do that as well. But no, it doesn't mean you won't get into college. There's a lot of colleges out there that would be excited. How soon will students be notified if their SAT site cancels? I have no idea. I wish I did. But I don't work for the College Board, and I know that for them this is unprecedented, so I'm trying not to give them too hard of a time. But I know students that have shown up at the testing site and found out it was canceled. So I just don't know. If students are running START students but then take a gap year, a year off between their senior year and enrolling in a four-year college, for those of you that aren't aware, are they then competing as a transfer student? Does that vary much by the school? If they're looking at Washington State, they are actually still applying as a first-year student. So the only time you can apply as a transfer student is if you were considered enrolled at a community college. And although you are enrolled at a college right now, you're also enrolled at a high school. So that kind of they compete against each other. And so generally speaking, you're still gonna apply as a first-year student, but because out of state, they don't understand running START quite as much, they might want you to apply as a transfer student. I will say there are more scholarships for first-year students than transfer students. So if a school allows you to apply as a first-year student, that's usually to your benefit, because they're still gonna take all the credits, but then you might have a slightly higher scholarship. So first-year students generally get a little bit more scholarship funding. Yeah, great questions. All right, so you're welcome. I'm hoping this was helpful. I know it was a lot of information, but I know I had a little amount of time and wanted to give you a lot. So again, we recorded this. I will make sure that your College and Career Center staff get a copy of this and the presentation. I don't mind sharing those at all. And I want you to know, seriously and honestly, that obviously I work for PLU, and if you're interested in PLU, I'd love to talk to you. But also if you're having a hard time finding an answer or finding your person on another college campus, I can't promise that I can answer all those questions, but I can try. So you can definitely use that email for just general college questions too. And, you know, I want to serve as a resource for this community like when I started. So hopefully you take advantage of that a little bit as well. I know this year feels different. I know it's not the year you wanted in terms of hopefully your ability to visit campuses and do this, but colleges are really trying hard to pivot and find ways to engage with you virtually. So hopefully we can just meet in the middle and make this a really great year of you know, learning about this process together. So we're excited to engage with you. We're excited for you to apply to our campuses. We're excited to kind of get through this year together. So the people I know on other college campuses are fantastic individuals who are excited to be in this group together. So this will be a special year for all of us in some ways. If you have more questions, you can put them in, but otherwise, I think this session is mostly over at this point. It looks like there's a couple thank yous in there, which I appreciate. I think your questions have been great, and I really do hope that this helped a little bit. So I hope you have a great evening. Go back to your family at this point, and I will hopefully get to actually see some of you soon, even if it's virtually. So have a great evening.